There is a name that has become a curse, a name that parents do not give to their children, a name that has passed into the languages of the world as a synonym for treachery itself, woven so deeply into the fabric of how human beings speak about disloyalty that it no longer needs translation or explanation. A name that, when spoken aloud, requires no context, no elaboration, no footnote, because everyone already knows what it means and what it carries and what it has come to represent across 2,000 years of human memory. You can speak it in any nation on earth, in any tongue, in any century since the one in which the man who bore it walked the dusty roads of Galilee beside the Son of God, and the meaning lands the same way every time, in every heart, without fail. Betrayer, traitor. The one who sold what was most precious for what was most cheap. The one who kissed the face he was condemning. The one who handed over innocence to death for the weight of 30 pieces of silver. The price of a slave gored by an ox. The price of nothing. The price of contempt. Judas. We say the name and something tightens in us. We say the name and we know instinctively, without having to think about it, which side of the story we stand on. We have heard it preached from 1,000 pulpits across 100 generations. We have seen it painted by the old masters, the figure always slightly apart from the others, slightly shadowed, slightly turned away, the purse clutched in the guilty hand, the face averted from the light that fell so freely on all the rest. We have read his story in the Gospels, and we have closed the book knowing exactly what we think of him. Exactly where he belongs, exactly what he deserves, and exactly what he will receive. He is the villain of the greatest story ever told. He is the necessary darkness against which the light of the Savior shines all the brighter. He is the one we are quietly, secretly, profoundly grateful that we are not. But what if you had never truly heard him? What if in all the long centuries of condemnation, in all the sermons and the paintings and the easy and comfortable certainties, you had never once stopped to consider the man who lived beneath the name, not to excuse him, not to absolve him, not to rewrite a single line of what the Scripture has plainly written, or to soften by even 1 degree what was done in that garden under the flickering torchlight, but simply to hear him, to sit for the length of this one strange and solemn encounter with the full weight of what it might have meant to be him, to walk in imagination the road he walked, from the first bright day he was called to the last black night he lived. To feel, even for a single moment, the terrible gravity of a soul that came so close to the light, closer than almost anyone who has ever lived, and chose in the end the dark. This is not a defense of Judas Iscariot. Let that be understood from the very first breath of what follows. There is no defense. What he did was done, and the Scripture names it plainly, and names it as sin, and we will not pretend otherwise across a single sentence of all that lies ahead. But there is a difference, a vast and important difference, between defending a man and understanding him. There is a difference between excusing a sin and refusing to dismiss the soul that committed it as though it had never been human at all, as though it were a mere instrument, a mere shadow, a mere function in a story that needed a betrayer and so manufactured one out of nothing and set it on the stage to play its part. To understand is not to forgive, and to forgive is not to approve, and we must hold all of these distinctions in our hands at once if we are to learn anything at all from the wreckage of this particular life. Because here is the thing we forget, the thing we have always forgotten, the thing it is almost too easy to forget. Judas was real. He was not a symbol when he lived. He was not a lesson or a warning or a category. He was a man with a face and a voice and a particular way of walking. A man with a mother who once held him as an infant against her chest and counted his fingers and wondered who he would become. He was a boy who grew up somewhere, in a real town under a real sun, who learned a trade or learned the Scriptures or learned the dusty roads of Judea by walking them barefoot as a child. He was a young man who heard, one ordinary day that began like any other, a voice that called him to leave everything he had and follow. And he went. That is the part we forget. He went. Before he was the betrayer, he was the follower. Before he was the traitor, he was the called. Before the kiss, before the silver, before the rope and the field, there was a young man who walked away from whatever life he had been carefully building and gave 3 years of that one short life to the most extraordinary person who has ever drawn breath. And he did it, at least in the beginning, because something deep inside him believed. What follows is an imagining. Let that also be understood clearly and held on to firmly so that no one mistakes what this is for something it is not. The Gospels give us the bare facts of what Judas did, the actions, the outcomes, the movements of his hands and feet. But they give us almost nothing of what Judas was on the inside. They do not open his heart to us. They do not let us hear his reasoning, his fear, his rationalizations, the slow interior unraveling that ended at last with a rope hung from a tree in a field bought with blood money. The Gospel writers were not interested in the psychology of the betrayer. They were interested in the betrayed. And so what we are about to do, carefully and reverently, and without ever contradicting a single truth that Scripture has revealed, is to enter into the silence that the Gospels left behind. We are going to imagine the confession that was never recorded, the explanation that was never offered, the inner voice that history silenced forever beneath the single crushing weight of one terrible name. We are going to let Judas speak, not to honor him, not to elevate him, not to make him into a tragic hero or a misunderstood victim of forces beyond his control, but because in his story, more than in almost any other story in the whole of Scripture, there is a warning so sharp and so personal and so frighteningly close to each one of our own hearts, that to ignore it, to look away from it, to keep it at the safe distance of the pulpit and the painting, is to miss one of the most important and most urgent things that the entire Gospel has to teach us. The story of Judas is not the story of a monster. If it were the story of a monster, it would be safe. We could read it the way we read the stories of distant and obvious villains, with the comfortable detachment of people who know with certainty that they could never become such a thing. But Judas was not a monster. Judas was a disciple. Judas was one of the 12. Judas was chosen, called by name, sent out to preach and to heal, trusted with the common purse, present at the miracles, seated at the table, washed by the very hands he would later sell. Judas was close. That is the thing that makes his story so terrible and so necessary. Not how far away from Jesus he was, but how near. And so before we begin, before we descend together into the imagined voice of the man who became the symbol of all betrayal, we want to pause and speak directly to you, the one watching this right now, wherever in the wide world you happen to be. Because at this very moment, in this very hour, you are not alone in this. All across the surface of the earth, others are listening to these same words, sitting with this same story, feeling the same strange weight settle over them. Someone in a quiet kitchen in Ohio, with the morning light just beginning to slant through the window and a cup of coffee cooling on the counter. Someone on a crowded train rattling through London, the grey city sliding past the glass, earphones in, the noise of the world held at bay for a little while. Someone in Nairobi as the heat of the day comes on, someone in Manila in the thick of the evening traffic, someone in Sao Paulo, someone in Lagos, someone in a small town in the north of England where the rain has not stopped falling for 3 solid days, someone in rural Australia watching long after dark, someone in Toronto on a hurried lunch break, someone in a village in India where the connection flickers and fades, but the hunger for these words does not flicker at all. We are scattered across every continent and every time zone, speaking 100 different languages and living 1,000 utterly different lives. And yet here we are, gathered together in this single moment, bent over the same ancient and unsettling and achingly human story. That is something genuinely worth pausing to recognize, something worth letting land on you before we go any further. So, we want to ask you, warmly and sincerely and from the heart, to do something small. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Your city, your country, or simply a word of greeting to the family gathered here. You will be amazed, truly amazed, to scroll through and see just how far this reaches, how many hearts are bent over this same story at this same hour, how wide and how deep and how real this scattered family truly is. And if this channel has ever brought you something true, ever met you in a hard hour, ever made the living scripture come alive in a way that stayed with you long after the video ended, then please, we ask you with all sincerity, subscribe. Press that button and become a permanent and counted part of this community. It costs you nothing at all, and it takes only a single second of your time. But it means more than you could possibly know, and it carries these words further out into the world, to people who need them desperately and do not yet even know that they exist. And if your heart is moved to go one step further, consider becoming a member of this channel. Members become part of the inner circle of this growing community, and they receive early access to every video we make before it ever reaches another living soul. It is a way of standing closer to the work, of helping it continue and grow, of belonging more fully to this family that now spans the whole of the earth. Look for the join button near the subscribe button, if that is something your heart finds itself drawn toward. Now, with our hearts prepared and our easy defenses lowered, with our certainties held a little more loosely than we are used to holding them, let us enter the silence together. Let us hear the confession that was never meant to be heard. Let us let the man who became a word speak at last as a man. You want to know who I was, not what I did. Everyone knows what I did. The whole world knows what I did and has known it for 2,000 years and will go on knowing it until the last day breaks over the earth. 2 millennia have passed and still they know, still they spit the name, still they flinch when it is spoken in a quiet room. I have become a word. Do you understand what that is, what it means to become a word? To have your whole life, every hope you ever carried in your chest, every prayer you ever whispered as a boy in the dark before sleep, every road you ever walked under the burning sun, every friendship and every fear and every dream of who you might one day become, collapsed down and crushed flat into a single syllable that means only one thing and will only ever mean one thing: betrayer. That is what I am now. That is all I am now. The name my mother gave me with love and hope, the name she called across the courtyard when supper was ready, the name she prayed over me when I was small, has become the name the whole world gives to its very worst. But before I was a word, I was a man. And before I was a man, I was a child, exactly as you were once a child, with a child's eyes and a child's wonder and a child's unshakable certainty that the world was large and good and full and waiting just for me. I do not tell you this to soften you toward me. I have no right to your softness, and I will not beg for it. I tell you this because you have judged a word, a single flattened syllable of contempt, and I am asking you, only for the length of this one telling, to set the word down for a moment and listen instead to a man. After this, you may pick the word back up again. You may condemn me again, as I deserve. But for now, listen. I was born in Kerioth, in the south, in Judea. That is what my name means, the part of it that has not yet curdled into a curse. Iscariot, Kerioth, the man from Kerioth. I was the only one of the 12 who was not a Galilean. Did you ever know that in all your hearing of my story? The others were all from the north, from the country around the Great Lake, fishermen and laborers and countrymen with the rough, broad accent of Galilee thick on their tongues. I was the southerner, the one from Judea, closer to Jerusalem, closer to the temple, closer to the beating heart of our nation and our faith, or so I believed, or so I told myself in the quiet places of my pride. I carried that always, a small and secret and carefully hidden pride, the private sense that I understood things the fishermen never could, that I saw the larger picture while they saw only the next day's catch, that I knew how the real world of power and money and politics actually turned on its axis while they were still mending their nets and talking about the weather over the water. That pride was the first crack in me. I see it now, with the terrible clarity that comes too late. I did not see it then. No one ever sees the first crack. It is always so small, always so well hidden, always dressed up as something reasonable and sensible and almost good. Mine was dressed up as understanding, as discernment, as a clear-eyed practicality that the others lacked. I understood things. I was practical. I was the one who could be trusted with the money, because I knew the true value of a coin, knew how to keep an honest account, knew how to make a single denarius stretch and a thin purse last through a lean week. And so they made me the treasurer, the keeper of the common purse. The 13 of us together, our little band, living off the freely given gifts of those who believed in him, and it was my hands, mine, that held what we had. My hands that counted it out at the end of the day. My hands that decided, in the small and unremarkable daily choices that no one ever noticed or questioned, what would be spent and what would be kept back. I want you to understand how it began, because it never, ever begins the way you imagine it does. You picture the betrayer as someone who was always, from the start, the betrayer. You imagine that I came to him already rotten through, already calculating, already planning and waiting and biding my time for the right moment to sell him to his enemies. It was not so. I swear to you by what little is left of me, it was not so. When I first heard him speak, I believed. God help me, I believed as fully and as fiercely as any of them ever did. More, perhaps. I'd been waiting my whole life for him, or for someone like him, for the one who would finally come and set the whole broken world to rights. You have to understand what it was in those days to be a Jew under the iron heel of Rome, to belong to a people with a promise and a memory and a God who had once, long ago, split the sea wide open for us and drowned the armies of Pharaoh and led us out of slavery with a pillar of fire. And then to find yourself ground down under the weight of an empire that worshipped its own emperor as a living God, that mocked everything we held sacred, that taxed us into poverty and crucified our sons along the roadsides as casual warnings to the rest. We were a humiliated people, a conquered, occupied, broken-spirited people, a people who paid our taxes to a distant Caesar with coins that bore his blasphemous graven face, who stepped aside in our own holy streets to let Roman soldiers swagger past, who buried our boys when they found the courage to resist and swallowed our boiling rage in silence when they did not. And through all of it, through every generation of the long humiliation, we held onto the promise. The Messiah would come, the anointed one of God, the Son of David. He would come in power, and he would break the yoke of the oppressor clean off our necks, and he would cast down the eagle of Rome, and he would restore the throne of David, and he would make Israel at last what Israel was always meant to be, a light to all the nations, a kingdom of righteousness that would never, ever end. That is what I was waiting for every day of my life. That is what I thought, with my whole burning heart, that I had finally found. When I first saw him, when I first heard the sound of his voice carrying across a hillside, something deep inside me rose up and cried out, "It is him. It is finally, finally him." And I left everything. Do you hear me? I want you to hear me on this, because no one ever says it. I left everything. Exactly the same as the others did, no less than they did, no more reluctantly than they did. I walked away from whatever small and ordinary life I had been building for myself in the south, and I followed a penniless wandering teacher from a nothing town called Nazareth, because I believed with the whole of my heart that he was the one who was going to change the entire world. And he was. That is the part that I can hardly bear to say. He was the one. That is the most bitter truth in all of my bitter story. I was not wrong about who he was. I was only catastrophically, eternally wrong about what he had come to do. Let me tell you about the early days, because no one ever talks about the early days. They only ever talk about the end, about the silver and the kiss and the rope. But there were years before the end. There were long, bright, ordinary, extraordinary years of walking those roads together. The 13 of us, under the blazing sun and the wheeling stars, sleeping in open fields and in the homes of generous strangers, eating whatever we were given and going hungry without complaint when we were given nothing. There were mornings when I woke before any of the others and saw him already awake, already risen, already gone apart by himself to pray in the grey and silent light before the dawn, and I would watch him from a distance. This man kneeling alone in the cold dew, speaking to his Father, and I would think to myself, with a certainty that filled my whole chest, I would follow this man anywhere, to the ends of the earth, into fire, into death itself, anywhere. I saw the things he did. You read about them now in your books, a few lines each, a paragraph at most, a miracle of the living God compressed and flattened into a single sentence that you skim over on your way to the next. But I was there. I stood in the dust and watched it happen with these eyes. I saw the leper. I saw the skin, the rot, the grey dead flesh, the way the man kept his distance, the way they were all forced by law to keep their distance, crying out, "Unclean, unclean," so that no one would come near him and be defiled by his touch. And I saw my Lord walk toward him, not away from him, the way every other person on that road was already shrinking away, toward him. I saw him stretch out his hand, the same hand I would one day agree to sell for silver, and I saw him touch what no one in the world would touch, lay his bare hand upon that rotting skin, and I saw the flesh become new beneath his fingers, saw it become clean and whole and pink as a child's, and I was standing close enough to hear the healed man fall to the ground and weep. I saw the blind receive their sight. I saw eyes that had never once looked upon the face of a wife or a child, or the rising sun, suddenly flood with light and color and weeping recognition. I saw the lame stand up and walk, and then run, and then leap, throwing aside the mats they had been carried on for 30 years. I saw him still a raging storm, with 3 quiet words spoken into the wind, when I was certain, utterly certain, that the boat was going down beneath us, and we were all about to drown together in the black and freezing water of that lake. I saw the loaves multiply in his hands, saw the bread break and never run out, saw the baskets fill and fill and fill again when there had been almost nothing to begin with, saw 5,000 hungry people eat their fill from a single boy's small lunch, and saw the fragments gathered up afterward into 12 full baskets, one for each of us. And I carried one of those baskets myself, and I felt the weight of it pull on my arm, and it was real. It was all real. I am the witness that you do not want and have never wanted, because I cannot give you the comfort of telling you it was a trick or a clever story or a legend that grew taller in the retelling over the years. I was there. I held the basket. It was real. He was everything they said he was, and more than they could say, and more than I have words to tell you even now. So how, you ask me, how? How does a man who saw all of that, who held the heavy basket in his own 2 hands, who watched the leper's flesh made clean and the dead man walk out of his tomb, how does such a man come at last to the garden with the soldiers and their torches at his back? How does he come to the kiss? That is the question, is it not? That is the question you have come all this way to hear me answer. And I will answer it as far as I am able, as far as I myself understand it, which is perhaps not as far as you would wish, and certainly not as far as you deserve. Because the truth, the strange and terrible truth, is that I did not fully understand it, even as I was doing it. The descent was so slow. That is what I most need you to hear and to carry away from this. The descent was so unbearably slow that I never once, not for a single moment along the way, felt myself to be falling. Every single step seemed reasonable at the time I took it. Every step seemed small and sensible and justified. I never once stood at a clear crossroads and chose evil with my eyes wide open and my will fully engaged. I never did that. Instead, I chose 100 small things, 1,000 small things, 10,000 small things, each one of them almost nothing in itself, each one easy to explain and easier to excuse. And those small things carried me, one tiny step at a time, down a road I never meant to walk, to a destination I never in my worst nightmares meant to reach. It began with the purse. I told you they made me the treasurer. I told you I held the common money of our little band. And I want you to understand, I need you to understand, that I did not begin as a thief. I began as a steward. I began genuinely proud of the trust they had placed in me, careful with every counting, scrupulous and honest in the keeping of it. But money does something to a man when he holds it alone in the dark, when he is the only one who knows exactly how much there is. Money whispers, it never shouts. It is far too clever to ever shout. It whispers low and reasonable, that you have earned a little something for all your careful labor. It whispers that no one will ever know because no one else keeps the count. It whispers that the others are careless and wasteful while you are careful and wise. And is it not only fair, after all, only just, that the careful one should keep back a small portion for himself, since he is the one doing the thankless work of the keeping? It whispers that you will pay it back soon. Of course you will, the moment things are easier. It whispers that this once, just this once, is not really stealing at all. Not truly, not the way that real stealing is. Because look, you are only borrowing, only setting a little aside, only taking what is rightfully owed to you for your trouble. The first coin I took, I remember it still. I remember the exact weight of it in my palm, and the way my heart slammed against my ribs, and the way I told myself over and over that it was nothing, it was owed, it was fair, it was just this once. And nothing happened. No fire fell from heaven, no voice spoke out of the sky. The earth did not open, and the sun did not darken. I took a coin from the common purse of the Son of God, money given in love by the poor to support his work, and the world went on turning exactly as it had before. And that, you see, that was the most dangerous thing of all, that nothing happened. Because a man learns from that silence. A man learns, in the marrow of his bones, that the line he was so afraid to cross was not guarded after all, that he can step over it and step back again, and no one in all the world will ever know. And so the second coin is easier than the first was, and the third is easier than the second. And after a little while, you are not even counting anymore, you are simply taking, and the taking has quietly become a part of who you are, woven down so deep into you that you no longer even remember the man you were before you took. This is how it works. I am telling you exactly how it works because you sit there thinking that you are not me, and that comfortable certainty is the single most dangerous thing you believe. You think the betrayer was a different kind of creature than you are, made of darker stuff, born under a worse star. He was not. He was a man who took a coin and told himself it was nothing. Look at your own life. Look honestly for once at the small coin you have taken, whatever it was, the small dishonesty you have justified, the small compromise you have made and remade, the small thing you told yourself was nothing, was owed, was fair, was only just this once. That is the first coin. That is exactly where it begins. It does not begin with selling God in a garden. No one begins there. It begins with a single coin in the dark and a soft, reasonable whisper that says, "No one will ever know." I need to tell you about the perfume, because that was the night that something turned in me, though I did not understand it as a turning at the time, and would have denied it angrily if you had named it to my face. We were in Bethany, in the house of a man called Simon. It was near the end, though I did not yet know how terribly near. There was a meal laid out, and there was warmth in the room, and there was that particular kind of gladness that came over us so often when we were all together around him, the gladness of belonging, of being inside the circle of his presence. And then she came in, Mary, the sister of Lazarus, the very same Lazarus whom he had called out of the tomb 4 days dead, called him out by name into the light of day, while the whole grieving town stood and watched, the grave clothes still hanging from his limbs, and the stench of death still on him. That family loved him beyond the ordinary loves of ordinary people, and how could they not? For he had given them back their brother, had reached his hand directly into death itself, and pulled their brother back out into the warm land of the living. How do you ever repay a thing like that? You cannot. There is no repaying it, not if you gave everything you owned for the rest of your life. But Mary, that night, tried. She came into the room carrying an alabaster jar. I knew what it was the instant my eyes fell upon it. I knew these things. I was the one who always knew the value of things, the prices, the worth of every object that passed before me. It was nard, pure nard, the costly kind, the genuine article, brought from far away, from the high mountains beyond the eastern edges of the empire, carried over deserts and seas at great expense. A sealed jar of nard like that one was worth a full year's wages for a working man. An entire year. 300 denarii, near enough, and I did the sum in an instant, the way I always did the sums, the figures running through my mind faster and surer than thought itself. A year of a laboring man's life, his sweat and his toil and his bread, all of it sealed up in a single jar of alabaster, and she broke it. She broke the slender neck of the jar so that it could never again be sealed, never saved, never resold, never anything ever again, but poured out, all of it, all at once, in a single, irreversible, extravagant act. And she poured it out over his feet, the whole year's wages of fragrance running down over his dusty, travel-worn feet and pooling on the floor, and the entire house filled at once with the overwhelming scent of it, this impossible, reckless, intoxicating perfume. And she knelt down low on the floor before him, and she wiped his wet feet with her own unbound hair, weeping as she did it. And no one in the whole room spoke a single word. And the fragrance rose and filled every corner of the house, and soaked into the walls and the cloth and the very skin of every person present, so that they would carry the smell of it with them for days. And something in me broke too, in that moment, but not in the way that it had broken open in her. I heard myself speak. I heard my own voice rise up and say the words, and they sounded so reasonable as they left my mouth. They sounded so right, so sensible, so much like simple virtue and good sense that even I believed them as I said them aloud. "Why was this perfume not sold," I said, "and the money given to the poor? 300 denarii, think of it. Think what such a sum could have accomplished. Think how many starving mouths it could have fed. How many naked backs it could have clothed. What a waste. What a senseless, sentimental, extravagant waste, poured out on the floor in a single thoughtless moment. And here is the thing I have had 2,000 years of silence to understand with perfect and unbearable clarity. I did not care about the poor. I have to say it to you plainly, because it is the truest and the ugliest thing I know about myself, and if I am to confess at all, then I must confess this. I spoke the words about the poor, and they were good words, the right words, the very words a righteous and compassionate man would say. But underneath the words, Down in the dark place where the coins were counted, I was thinking only of the purse. I was thinking that 300 denarii poured out upon a man's feet was 300 denarii that would now never, ever pass through my hands. I dressed my naked greed in the fine and borrowed clothing of compassion. I took the smallest, ugliest, most shameful motive in my heart, and I made it wear the mask of my highest and most noble ideal. And I did it so well, so smoothly, so convincingly, that I fooled every single person in that room. And worst of all, far worse than all the rest, I fooled my own self. This is what I most need you to see and to carry away. Not the greed itself, the disguise, the terrible, the deadly, the almost supernatural ease with which I could take the very worst thing in me and dress it up to look like the very best thing in me, and never once know the difference, never once feel the lie. The way I could stand there in that fragrant room, positively reeking of self-interest, and believe, truly and sincerely believe, that I was the only person present who genuinely cared about the suffering poor. That is the deepest and most secret danger of the human heart, and I am its living proof. I am the exhibit held up for all the ages. It is not that we do evil while knowing full well that it is evil. That is a smaller and a rarer thing. It is that we do evil while we are fully convinced that it is good. It is that we build a case, a reasonable case, a righteous-sounding and even a scriptural-sounding case, and the case becomes the high, strong wall behind which the real motive hides itself and grows fat and powerful in the darkness, fed by our own self-regard. He rebuked me, gently the way he did almost everything, but he rebuked me all the same, there in front of the others. "Leave her alone," he said. "Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing. She has kept this for the day of my burial. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them whenever you wish, but you will not always have me." And I did not understand him then, not at all. Burial? What burial was this? What dark and morbid talk had taken hold of him? He was the Messiah. He was the Anointed One, the Conqueror, the one who would reign forever on the throne of David. He was the one who would break the power of Rome and restore the glory of Israel. What was all this sudden talk of burial, this shadow that had fallen across his words, this strange note of surrender and ending that I heard creeping into his voice more and more often as the days went on? It unsettled me deeply. It frightened me, if I am honest. And I think, looking back now across the long centuries of my regret, that it was somewhere in that fragrant, unsettled moment that the true turning in me began. Because I carried in my mind a fixed and detailed picture of who he was supposed to be and what he was supposed to do, and he kept refusing, again and again, to be it. He kept talking about death when I wanted to hear about victory. He kept talking about surrender when I wanted to hear about conquest, about losing when I burned to hear about winning, about a kingdom that looked nothing at all like the kingdom I had given my life to follow him toward, about a throne that, the more he described it, looked horribly and increasingly like a cross. I wanted a lion. And he kept, so gently, so patiently, so maddeningly, showing me a lamb. You must try to understand my disappointment, because my disappointment is the deep and hidden root from which everything else grew. I have heard across the centuries the way your preachers explain me. It was only greed, they say, only the 30 pieces of silver, only the simple love of money festering in a small and grasping heart, and the money was real. I will not stand here and deny the money, for I have already confessed to you the coins I took in the dark. But the money was never the whole of it, never the deepest of it. A man does not sell God himself for the price of a common slave unless something far deeper has already died and rotted inside him long before. The silver was only the occasion. The disappointment was the true and underlying cause. I had followed him for 3 long years, believing with every fiber of my being that he was building steadily towards something glorious. believing that every miracle was another stone laid in the foundation of the coming throne, that every gathering crowd was another company of soldiers assembling for the great army, that every word of power and authority was another sure sign that the day was drawing near, the great day, the day of liberation and vengeance and restoration, the day when he would finally stop healing lepers and feeding peasants on hillsides, and would stand up at last in the full and terrible strength of God and drive the legions of Rome screaming into the sea. I was waiting for that day with everything in me. We were all waiting for it, in our different ways, but I was waiting for it with a particular and gnawing hunger, with a particular and growing impatience, with a particular and prideful certainty that I understood the true plan better, somehow, than he himself seemed to. And the day never came. It never came. Instead, as the months wore on, the talk grew only darker and stranger and more troubling. He began to speak openly, plainly, of going up to Jerusalem in order to die there. He began to say, again and again, that the Son of Man must suffer many things, must be rejected by the elders and the chief priests, must be handed over and mocked and killed. He set his face toward the holy city like a man deliberately walking toward his own execution, with a fixed and dreadful resolve. And when Peter, dear impulsive Peter, took him aside and tried to talk him out of such madness, he turned on Peter with words I had never once heard him use against anyone, called him Satan to his face, told him to get behind him, told him he was thinking the small thoughts of men and not the great thoughts of God. And I stood there at the edge of it, and I thought, with a cold dread spreading through me, what is happening to him? This is not the plan. This is not the victory we were promised. This is not the kingdom I gave my whole life to follow. This is a man walking willingly, deliberately, eyes open, straight into a trap that will destroy him, and he will not let any of us stop him. And worst of all, he calls this surrender, this defeat, this throwing away of everything, he calls it the very will of God. I think I decided, somewhere deep inside myself in those dark and disappointed days, that he had somehow lost his way, that he possessed all the power in the world and had simply, inexplicably, lost the nerve to use it, that he could have been everything, everything we ever hoped for, and had chosen instead, for reasons I could not begin to fathom or forgive, to be nothing, to throw it all away, to let the whole magnificent thing end in shameful death when it could so easily have ended in unimaginable glory. And I think, God forgive me, though I no longer know if he can or will, I think I decided that someone had to do something. That if he himself would not force the moment to its crisis, then perhaps the moment would have to be forced for him by another hand, by a hand willing to do the hard and unpleasant thing that needed doing. Do you see how I reasoned? Do you see, even now, how even my betrayal managed to wear the mask of help, the mask of service, the mask of a deeper loyalty? There are those, even among your own scholars in your own time, who wonder still whether I betrayed him, not out of simple hatred or simple greed, but in some twisted attempt to force his hand, to put him in a corner so tight, so desperate, so utterly without escape, that he would finally have no choice left but to call down the legions of angels from heaven and at last, at long last, become the conquering Messiah I had always demanded that he be. I do not know with certainty if that is true. I have had 2,000 years of darkness in which to search my own heart, and even now I cannot tell you for certain what was truly in it on that night, because the human heart is the darkest and most uncharted country of them all, and a man can deceive himself there more completely and more permanently than he can ever deceive another living soul. But I think there was some of that in me. I think I told myself in some chamber of my heart that I was helping. I think I told myself that this would force the great confrontation, would trigger the kingdom, would finally bring on the day I had ached for through 3 long years. I think I dressed up the worst and most monstrous betrayal in all of human history as a kind of bold and necessary service to the very one I was selling. That is what the human heart is capable of. Remember it. Burn it into your memory. Remember it, especially in those moments when you are most certain, most serenely and completely certain that you are doing the right and necessary thing. Remember that the most monstrous act ever committed under the sun was committed by a man who had more than half convinced himself that it was all for the best. The night I finally went to them, to the chief priests, I want you to know that it was nothing like triumphant. The old paintings show me clutching the bag of silver to my chest with a greedy gleam in my eye and a sneer on my lips. But it was not like that. Not at all. I went through the dark and silent streets of Jerusalem with my heart sick and heaving in my chest, my stomach turning, my hands cold. Part of me even then, even on that final errand, was desperately hoping that something would rise up and stop me, that a hand would reach out of the shadows and seize my arm, that he would somehow know, the way he always seemed to know things, and would send for me, and would look at me with those eyes that saw straight through to the bottom of a man, and would speak the one word that would call me back from the edge. He had called Lazarus back out of the very tomb. Surely he could call me back from this. But no hand reached out of the darkness. The streets stayed empty and silent. And I came at last to the house of the high priest, and I went in, and I said the words that once spoken could never again be unsaid in all of eternity. "What will you give me," I asked them, "if I hand him over to you?" And they weighed out for me 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces. Do you know what that number is? Do you know what it meant? I knew it. I knew it the very instant they said it, and it landed in me like a knife slipped between the ribs. Though God help me, I took the money anyway. 30 pieces of silver was the price of a slave. It was fixed in the law of Moses, written plainly in the book of Exodus. If a man's ox should gore another man's slave to death, the owner of the ox must pay to the slave's master 30 shekels of silver. That was the worth of a slave's whole life, killed by an animal. And that was the sum they coldly set as the price of the Son of the living God. Not because that was his true worth, for his worth was beyond the value of all the silver and gold that has ever been dug out of the earth, but because that was the precise measure of their contempt. They were telling me, in the very sum they counted out into my trembling hand, exactly what they thought he was worth, and exactly what they thought I was worth for bringing him to them. The price of a dead slave gored by an ox, and I took it. God help me, I took it. And I felt the cold weight of it settle into my purse the way I had felt the weight of that very first stolen coin years before, in the dark. And I told myself, the way I had always told myself, that it would all somehow turn out to be all right in the end. We come now to the upper room, and I can hardly bear to tell you of it even now, even after all this time. But I must, because it is the place where his love and my treachery stood closest together, close enough to reach out and touch, close enough that he washed my feet with the very same gentleness and the very same care with which he washed the feet of the ones who truly loved him. It was the Passover, the great feast of our people, the holy meal of remembrance, the sacred night on which we remembered how God had brought us out of our slavery in Egypt, how the blood of the spotless lamb painted on the doorposts had turned aside the angel of death, so that he passed over our houses and struck only the houses of our oppressors. We gathered together in the upper room, the 13 of us, and I took my place among them with the silver already promised, and the bargain already struck, and the betrayal already alive and breathing inside me like a second and a darker heartbeat. I sat at the table of the Lord of glory with murder already hidden in my purse, and I ate his bread, and I drank from his cup, and I let him serve me. And then, in the middle of the meal, he rose from his place. He took off his outer garment and laid it aside. He took a towel and wrapped it around his waist the way a household slave would do, the lowest and least slave in all the house, the one whose task it was to wash the filth of the road from the feet of the guests. And he poured water into a basin with his own hands, and he knelt down on the floor, the Lord of heaven and earth kneeling in the dust before fishermen and tax collectors, and he began to wash our feet, one by one. He went to each of us in turn, and he knelt before each one, and he took our dirty, calloused feet into his own holy hands, the feet that had walked the long, dusty roads of Galilee and Judea beside him, and he washed them clean, and he dried them gently with the towel that was wrapped around his waist. And then he came to me. I want you to understand what that was, what it cost, what it meant. He knew. I am as certain of this as I am certain of anything in all the world. He knew exactly what I had done. He knew about the silver. He knew about the bargain I had struck in the high priest's house. He knew, with perfect clarity, what I was going to do before that night was over. He knew it all, and he knelt down before me anyway, and he took my feet into his hands, these feet, the very feet that would within hours walk me out into the night to fetch the soldiers and lead them to him in the dark. He held them in his hands, the same hands I had already agreed to sell for the price of a slave. He poured the cool water over them, and he washed them clean of the dust of the road, and he dried them with the towel, and he did not say, in that quiet and terrible moment, before all the others, you are the one. He did not expose me. He did not shame me before my brothers. He did not snatch his hands back in disgust. He knelt there in the dust before the man, who was at that very moment in the act of selling him to his death, and he washed that man's feet as tenderly and as lovingly as if I had been the most faithful and beloved disciple in all the room. Why did he do that? I have asked it 10,000 times across the long ages of my regret. Why such tenderness, such gentleness, such unguarded love for the one he knew beyond all doubt was already lost, already sold, already gone? And I think, after all this endless time, that I have finally come to understand it. He was giving me one more chance. To the very last, to the very edge of the abyss, he was still holding the door wide open for me. Every single act of love he showed me on that long night was a hand deliberately extended down into the darkness where I was hiding, a voice quietly saying, even now, even at this final hour you could still turn. Even now you could still come back to me. Even now it is not yet too late. The washing of my feet was not a rebuke, and it was not a resignation. It was an invitation. It was the love of God himself kneeling in the dust before the very worst sinner in the room, refusing, simply refusing, to give up on him, even when the betrayal was already sealed and set in motion. And then at the table he spoke the words aloud. One of you, he said, will betray me. And a terrible stillness fell over the whole room, a silence you could feel pressing on your skin. And one by one, looking stricken, they began to ask him, surely it is not I, Lord, surely not I. And the dreadful question went around the table from man to man, each one of them searching his own heart in fear. And I marveled, even in that moment, even with the silver in my purse, that not one of them turned to look at me, not one of them suspected, not one pointing finger. I had hidden it all so well, worn the mask of the faithful disciple so perfectly for so long, that the 11 men who had walked beside me every day for 3 years could not see the traitor sitting in their very midst, sharing their bread. That is how good the disguise can become, given enough time and enough practice. That is how completely a man can hide what he truly is, not only from the world, but from everyone who loves him and thinks they know him. And then he did a thing that I have never, in 2,000 years, been able to forget or to escape. He took a piece of bread, and he dipped it into the dish, and he handed it across the table directly to me. and he placed it into my hand. "The one to whom I give this piece of bread," he had said, "is the one who will betray me." And he gave it to me. He named me in the gentlest and most veiled way possible, in a way that perhaps only he and I fully understood in that moment. And he placed the morsel of bread into my open hand. And do you know what that gesture meant in our culture, at our table, in that time and place? To hand a guest the dipped bread, the choice piece, the special morsel from the dish, was an act of honor, an act of particular friendship, a sign of special affection and favor from a host toward a beloved and honored guest. With the very same gesture that exposed and identified me as the betrayer, he honored me. With the very act that named me as the one who would hand him over to death, he extended to me one last unmistakable sign of his love. Even in the naming, even in the unmasking, even then, he was still reaching for me, still holding the door open, still saying to me, with that small piece of bread resting in my hand, "It does not have to be this way, my friend. There is still time. There is still a way back." And the scripture says that when I had taken the bread, Satan entered into me, and he said to me, "What you are going to do quickly." So I rose from the table, and I went out into the dark. And it was night. It was night. The gospel records it so simply, so plainly, in those 4 small words. He went out, and it was night. But you must understand that it was not only the hour of the day that was dark. I carried the night out with me into the streets of the city. I'd been sitting in the very presence of the light of the world, the light that shines in the darkness, and that the darkness has never been able to overcome. And I rose up from beside that light, and I walked out into the dark, and I became part of the dark myself. And the door that had stood open all through that long and tender and grace-filled evening, the door he had held open for me with every single act of love, I closed it behind me with my own hand as I stepped out into the street. I chose the night. I want you to hear that and to hear it clearly and to never forget it. He never once stopped offering me the light, not at the basin, not at the table, not with the bread. I chose the night. You want to know about the garden? Of course you do, everyone does. The garden is where the Word was born, the Word that I became, the Word that I will be until the end of all things. Gethsemane, the place of the olive press. The place where the ripe olives are crushed under the great turning weight of a stone to bring out the precious oil, crushed and pressed and broken. The very same way that he would be crushed and pressed and broken that night under the weight of all the sin of all the world. I knew that he would be there. We had gone there often, all of us together, to pray in the quiet of the olive trees, to rest, to be apart from the pressing crowds. I knew his habits. I knew the places he loved to go. And that is the deepest horror of it. That is the thing I can least bear to say. I used my own intimacy with him as the weapon against him. I knew exactly where he would go to pray on that night of all nights, and I led his enemies, with their torches and their swords, directly to the secret place of his prayer. The knowledge that should have been the precious fruit of 3 years of love became, in my hands, the instrument of his betrayal. I came into the garden with the soldiers and the officers sent by the chief priests, with their flickering torches and their swinging lanterns and their drawn weapons, their light a false and smoking and man-made light. Nothing at all like the true light I had turned my back on and walked away from. And we came in among the ancient gnarled olive trees, and there he was, waiting. He did not run. He did not hide himself among the shadows of the trees. He had been praying so hard and in such agony, they told me later, that his sweat had fallen to the ground like great drops of blood, praying that if it were possible, the cup of suffering might pass from him, and yet praying, in the end, through all his anguish, "Not my will, Father, but yours be done." He had wrestled with God in the darkness of that garden, and he had surrendered himself to God in that garden. And so when I came at last with the torches and the armed men, he was not afraid. He was ready. He stepped forward to meet us. He asked them whom they were seeking. He gave himself up freely into their hands. He was always, from the very beginning to the very end, the one truly in control, even of his own betrayal, even of his own arrest, even of his own death. And I had given them a sign by which to know him in the dark and the confusion, a sign. This was perhaps the most monstrous detail of the whole monstrous night, and I have never in all the centuries since been able to explain to myself why I chose the sign that I chose. The one I kiss, I had told them, that is the man you want. Seize him and lead him away safely. A kiss. Of all the signs in all the world that I might have chosen, a raised hand, a spoken word, a touch on the shoulder, I chose a kiss, the sign of love, the sign of friendship and affection and deepest loyalty, the customary greeting that a disciple gave to his beloved teacher, the warm greeting of a friend to a friend, of a brother to a brother. I took the most tender and intimate gesture that our people possessed, and I turned it into the cold blade that would mark him out and open his side to death. I came to him there in the wavering torchlight. "Rabbi," I said to him, "Master," and I leaned in, and I kissed him. I felt his cheek against my lips. I felt the warmth of his skin, the realness of him, the solid living presence of the man I had followed for 3 years, the man I had watched cleanse the leper and still the storm and raise the dead from their tombs, and I pressed my mouth to his face, and I marked him out for death with the gesture of love and friendship. And he looked at me. He looked at me in the torchlight with those eyes, and he said, "Judas." He said my name, my own name, in his mouth, one last time. He said, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? Would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? Not a curse, not a scream of rage and hatred, not the fury and the condemnation that I so richly deserved, and that would have been so much easier to bear. A question, a grieving, knowing, sorrowful question, with my own name attached to it, my name spoken by him in the garden, in the torchlight, in the very last moment that we would ever stand face to face in this world. And in another of the tellings, he called me friend. Friend, do what you came to do. He called me friend, even then, even in that moment, with the kiss of betrayal still warm on his cheek. And the soldiers laid their hands on him and seized him, and it was done. The kiss was given and could not be taken back. The Son of God was handed over into the hands of sinful men. And the long, slow unraveling that had begun so quietly, so harmlessly, with a single coin taken in the dark, had finally arrived at its terrible and final destination, here among the olive trees, under the false and smoking torchlight. I thought, in some dark and twisted corner of my self-deceiving heart, that I would feel something like relief when it was done, or something like triumph, or at the very least, something like vindication. I thought perhaps that the great moment would come now at last, that he would finally summon the hidden power, and the day I had waited for through 3 long years would dawn at last in fire and glory. But the very instant that I turned away from him, the very instant that the soldiers led him off, bound into the dark, the lie that had carried me all this long way simply died. It died all at once, completely, the way a flame dies in an instant when the air is taken from it, snuffed out, gone. And I was left standing there alone in the cold and emptying garden with nothing but the truth, the naked and unbearable and inescapable truth, that I had betrayed innocent blood, that I had sold the only good and perfect and sinless man who had ever lived or ever would live, that I had taken the silver and given them my Lord, my Master, my friend, and that there was no plan, no clever scheme, no secret and noble justification anywhere in all the world that could survive even a single moment's contact with what I had actually, in cold and simple fact, just done. The disguise was gone. All the elaborate masks I had worn for so long, the noble concern for the poor, the holy impatience for the coming of the kingdom, the comfortable certainty that I was only helping, the proud conviction that I understood the true plan better than he did himself, all of it burned away to ash in a single instant and left me standing exposed in the pure light of the truth I had been fleeing from my whole life long. I was a traitor. I had betrayed God himself into the hands of his murderers, and no story that I could tell myself, no excuse that I could construct could ever again make it into anything other than exactly what it was. This is the mercy and at the same time the terror of the truth, that it comes at last for every self-deceiving heart in the end. You can run from it for years, for decades, for a whole lifetime. You can build wall after wall after wall of careful justification. You can dress your very worst motives in your very finest virtues and parade them proudly before the watching world and even before your own eyes in the mirror. But there comes a moment, there always comes a moment, sooner or later, when the lie can carry you no further, when the thing that you have actually done at last stands stark and naked before you, stripped of every excuse and every disguise, and you see it for what it truly is. And in the same instant you see yourself for what you truly are. For me, that moment came too late, there in the emptying garden, with the kiss still warm upon my lips, and the soldiers' torches already disappearing into the dark, carrying my Lord away to his death. Let me tell you what I did next, because it is here in what I did after the betrayal that the true and deepest tragedy of my soul actually lies. Not in the betrayal itself. The betrayal was monstrous, yes, beyond all words, but the betrayal was not the end of the story, and it was not the thing that finally and forever damned me. What I did after the betrayal was the true catastrophe, and it is the thing that I most need you to understand, because it is the very place, the exact point, where you could still choose differently than I chose, even now, even you. Even with whatever weight you carry in your own heart. When the morning came, and I saw with my own eyes that he had been condemned to death, that they had handed him over to Pilate, that the great grinding machinery of execution was now in motion and would not be stopped, the full and crushing weight of what I had done fell upon me all at once, and I could not bear it. I was seized with remorse. The scripture itself uses that very word for what came over me, and it is the right word. But I want you to understand exactly what kind of remorse it was, because there are two kinds of remorse in this world, two utterly different kinds, and the difference between them is nothing less than the difference between life and death, between heaven and hell, between Peter and Judas. I felt the agony of what I had done. I felt the unbearable, the infinite wrongness of it crashing over me in waves. I felt the silver in my purse turn to burning fire against my side, and I took it, all of it, the 30 pieces, and I ran back through the streets to the chief priests, back to the temple, and I threw the money down at their feet. I have sinned, I cried out to them in front of everyone. I have betrayed innocent blood. I said the words, "Do you hear me?" At last, too late, I said the true words. I named my sin for exactly what it was. I named his innocence for exactly what it was. I confessed out loud in the temple before the priests and before God the exact and complete truth of what I had done, and they looked at me with cold and indifferent eyes, and they said, "What is that to us? See to it yourself. What is that to us?" They had used me for their purposes, and now they discarded me like a broken tool. They had no comfort to offer me, and comfort from them was not what I had come seeking anyway. I flung the silver down hard upon the temple floor, and the coins scattered and rang and rolled against the stones. And I turned, and I ran out of that place into the morning, and I was utterly, completely, and infinitely alone in all the world. Now hear me. Hear me very carefully, because everything, absolutely everything, turns upon this one point. I felt remorse, deep and genuine remorse. I confessed my sin, openly and truly. I named the innocence of the one I had so terribly wronged. I even threw away the money, the very thing, the 30 pieces of silver, for which I had supposedly committed the betrayal in the first place. By every outward measure that you could possibly apply, I did the things that a penitent man does. I did them. So why, then, am I remembered as the very symbol of damnation and not as a symbol of repentance and restoration? Why did my deep sorrow not save me, the way that Peter's sorrow saved him on that same dark night? Because there is a sorrow that leads to life, and there is a sorrow that leads only to death. And I, in my blindness and my pride and my despair, chose the wrong one. I felt the full and crushing weight of my sin, but I did not carry that weight back to the only one in all the universe who could lift it from me. I confessed my sin to the priests, who could do absolutely nothing with my confession, instead of throwing myself down at the pierced feet of the one I had betrayed, who could have done everything, who would have done everything. I believed completely in the reality and the horror of my own guilt, but I did not believe, I could not bring myself to believe, in the reality and the greatness of his mercy. And that, in the end, that one fatal failure of belief, is what truly destroyed me. Not the betrayal, the despair that followed it, not the sin itself, but the final fatal refusal to believe that even this sin, even my sin, could possibly be forgiven. Let me tell you about Peter, because you cannot truly understand my story without setting it beside his. And the two of us, placed side by side that night, are perhaps the single most important comparison in the whole of the gospel, the one you most need to see and to understand and to take into your own heart. Peter denied him too. Do you remember? On the very same night, the very same dark night on which I betrayed him in the garden with a kiss, Peter denied him 3 times in the courtyard of the high priest. 3 times. A lowly servant girl pointed at him and said, "You also were with this Galilean. You were one of his followers." And Peter said, "I do not know the man." And she said it again, and he denied it again. And a 3rd time, when they pressed him, he began to curse and to swear, calling down oaths upon himself, swearing that he had never once known the Lord he had followed faithfully for 3 years, the Lord who had given him a new name, who had called him the Rock, who had let him walk upon the very water of the sea. 3 times Peter looked the Lord's own people in the eye and swore, "I never knew him." And then the rooster crowed in the grey dawn, just exactly as the Lord had foretold that it would. And Peter remembered the words of Jesus, and the scripture says that he went out from that place and wept bitterly, weeping as though his heart would break in 2. Now think hard upon this. Sit with it. Peter denied him. I betrayed him. Both of us failed him utterly on that same terrible night. Both of us broke under the weight of the testing. Both of us, in our own different ways, abandoned and disowned the one we had sworn with our whole hearts to follow even unto death. And both of us, when we understood what we had done, wept bitter tears. Both of us felt the crushing, sickening weight of our own failure and betrayal. In the dark hours just after that night, Peter and I were not so very different from one another. 2 broken men, 2 failures. 2 disciples who had promised their Lord everything and given him nothing at all when the great test finally came upon them. But here, exactly here, is where our 2 roads divided, and the dividing of those roads made all the difference between us, for time and for all eternity. Peter wept, and then Peter waited. Peter carried his terrible failure and his crushing shame, but he carried it back toward the Lord and not away from him. He did not run off alone into the final dark. He stayed. He waited through the long silence of that Sabbath, and when the women came running back from the empty tomb with their impossible news, Peter ran to see for himself. And when the risen Christ began to appear to his own, Peter was there among them. And on a beach, in the grey light of morning beside a charcoal fire, the risen Lord asked Peter 3 times, "Simon, do you love me?" once for each of the 3 denials. And 3 times Peter answered him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And 3 times the Lord restored him and gave him back his calling and told him to feed his sheep. Peter's failure, his bitter and shameful failure, became the very soil in which his greatest ministry would grow. The man who denied his Lord 3 times in a courtyard became the rock upon which the whole church would be built, and preached the first great sermon at Pentecost, and turned thousands to Christ, and died at last a martyr's death, crucified, they say, with his head downward, because he did not count himself worthy to die in the very same way that his Lord had died. That could have been me. Do you hear what I am telling you? Do you understand what I am saying to you across all these centuries? That could have been me. There was a charcoal fire with my name on it too. There was a beach waiting for me too. There was a question, "Do you love me?" that the risen Lord would have asked of me just as gladly and just as tenderly as he asked it of Peter, if only I had waited to be asked. The mercy that restored Peter was not some special mercy reserved for Peter alone. It was the mercy of God, the boundless and bottomless mercy of God, and the mercy of God has no limit, no edge, no border, no place where it finally runs out and says, "This far," and no further than this. If I had only carried my sin back to him instead of away from him, if I had only waited those 3 long days, if I had only been there in that upper room when he came and stood among them and showed them his wounded hands, he would have forgiven me. I am as certain of it now as I am certain of my own ruin. He would have looked at me with those same eyes that called me friend in the garden, and he would have forgiven me fully and freely and completely, because that is what he came into the world to do. That is the whole and entire reason that he came, to forgive exactly the kind of sinner that I was, to save exactly the kind of sin that I had committed. But I did not wait. That is the whole of my tragedy, contained in 4 small words. I did not wait. I could not bring myself to believe that the mercy could possibly be wide enough, deep enough, strong enough to cover me. I looked at the size of my sin, and I looked at it alone in the dark, with no one beside me. And I decided that it was larger than the mercy of God. And in that one decision, in that single catastrophic and final act of unbelief, I committed a sin more terrible even than the betrayal itself. I called my own sin greater than his grace. I made my treachery into the one thing in all the universe that the blood of the Lamb of God could not wash away and could not cover. And so I went out, alone, into a field, and I found a tree, and I made a rope, and in that field that my blood money would buy, I put an end to the very life that he would have so gladly and so joyfully redeemed. I want to speak now directly to you, not as the man in the old story, not as the figure in the painting, but across the long centuries, from the far side of the worst mistake any human being has ever made, to you, sitting there wherever you are, listening to these words. Because I have not told you all of this so that you would pity me. Pity is of no use to me now, and I have no right to ask for it. I have told you my story, opened my heart and my shame to you, because I am terrified, with whatever fear a soul like mine is still capable of feeling, that you will make the very same mistake that I made, and that you will not even know that you are making it until it is too late. You think that the great lesson of my life is simply this: do not betray Jesus. But that is not the lesson. That is far too easy, far too safe, far too comfortable. Very few of you will ever sell him for silver coins in a high priest's house. The lesson of my life is something far more dangerous than that, something far closer to your own heart, something far harder to see and far harder to escape. The lesson of my life is this: you can be near him as near as I was and still be lost. You can sit at his very table and still be lost. You can hear every word that falls from his lips, and watch every miracle that flows from his hands, and carry the purse, and be counted among the inner circle of the 12, and still, even so, be lost. If you never once let his love past the careful surface of your life and down into the hidden depths where the real you is crouching in the dark, counting coins, building walls, dressing up your secret sins in the borrowed clothing of your public virtues. I was as close to him as any human being who has ever lived. I walked beside him every day for 3 years, and it did not save me. It did not save me, because closeness is not the same thing as surrender, and being near is not the same thing as belonging, and proximity is not the same thing as faith, and being counted among his followers is not the same thing as being truly and inwardly his. You can sit inside the church every week of your life and never once be inside of Christ. You can know all the words and all the songs and all the stories and never truly know him. You can fool everyone around you, fool the people in the next seat, fool the 11 who walk beside you, fool even your own self, right up to the very end. The disguise can hold for an entire lifetime, but it cannot hold forever. And when it finally falls away, as it will, you will see yourself at last exactly as you are. And in that moment, the only question that will matter, the only question in all the world, is the very question that I got so fatally wrong. Where will you carry the truth of what you are? Back to him or away from him? Into his open arms or out into the night? That is the whole of it. That is everything I have to give you, paid for with the ruin of my own soul. 2 roads diverge from every human failure, from every fall, from every betrayal, great or small, and they are the road of Peter and the road of Judas. And at the very start, they look almost exactly the same. Both of them begin in sorrow. Both of them begin in the bitter weeping of a soul that has finally seen the truth of what it is. But one of those roads carries that sorrow back to the feet of Christ and finds there a mercy with no bottom and no end and no limit. And the other road carries that very same sorrow away, alone into the dark, and finds there only a rope and a tree and a field bought with the wages of betrayal. The roads divide upon a single question, and it is not the question, "What have I done?" Both men knew exactly what they had done. The question that divides the roads is this one: do I believe that even this can be forgiven? Do I believe that the mercy is wider than my sin? Peter believed it. I did not. And that, not the betrayal, not the silver, not even the kiss in the garden, that one failure of belief is the true and final tragedy of the man you call Judas. Hear me, all of you who are listening now, scattered as you are across the whole wide face of the earth, in your kitchens and your cars, and your crowded trains, and your quiet rooms in the dark of the night. There is no sin that the blood of Christ cannot cover. There is no betrayal too deep for it, no failure too complete, no darkness too far gone, no soul too far lost. I am the living proof of what despair can do to a man, of where it leads, of how it ends. But I am also, in the strange and upside-down economy of God, a kind of proof of just how wide the mercy must truly be. Because if there was any mercy at all for me, and there was mercy even for me, even for the betrayer. If I had only turned and reached out and taken it, then there is mercy for anyone. There is mercy for everyone. There is mercy for you, whoever you are, whatever you have done, however far you believe you have fallen. The door that he held open for me all through that long last night, the door that I closed behind me with my own hand as I walked out into the dark, that very same door is standing open for you, right now, in this very moment. He is still kneeling. Do you understand? He is still kneeling there with the basin and the towel. He is still washing feet. He is still handing the bread of friendship across the table to the very ones who are about to fail him and deny him and betray him. He is still calling the betrayer friend. The cross has happened now, and the empty tomb has happened now, and so the mercy that I could not bring myself to believe in is now poured out and proven and made certain for all the world to see, sealed in his own blood, confirmed by his own resurrection from the dead. The thing I despaired of is the very thing he accomplished. The forgiveness I could not believe was possible is the very gift he died to give. So do not do what I did. I beg you with everything that is left of me, when you see at last what you truly are, and you will see it, for the day comes for every honest soul, when all the disguises fall away and the naked truth stands plainly before you. When that day comes for you, do not run into the night as I did. Run to him. Throw yourself down at the very feet that I betrayed, and find to your everlasting amazement that they are the feet that were pierced through for you, the feet that walked willingly and deliberately all the way to the cross for exactly this moment, for exactly you, for exactly the sin that you are most certain can never be forgiven. The size of your sin is not the measure of anything that matters. The size of his mercy is the only measure that has ever mattered or ever will, and his mercy has no size at all because it has no end. I cannot go back. That door is closed to me now by my own hand and my own choice, and I will not stand here and pretend otherwise, and I will not let you comfort yourself with sentimental and easy hopes about my own fate that the Scripture does not give you the right to hold. I made my choice in that field with the rope, and the choice was final, and it was mine, and I own it fully and forever. But you are still here. You are still listening to these words. You still have breath in your body and blood in your veins and time upon the earth, and a door standing wide open in front of you, the very door that I slammed shut in front of myself. Do not waste it. For the love of God, do not waste it. Do not waste the mercy that cost him everything. Do not look at your own sin and call it greater than his grace, because that one thing, that despairing unbelief, is the only sin that ever truly and finally damns a human soul, the flat refusal to believe that the grace is real and that it is meant for you. I have heard, across the long centuries of my silence, the way that you tell my story. I have heard the preachers thunder my name from their pulpits as the dark warning at the very end of the sermon. I have heard the comfortable certainty in your voices, the safe distance you keep, the unspoken thought lying just beneath all your words. I am not Judas. I could never be Judas. I would never do what he did. And I want to tell you, as gently as a soul like mine is permitted to tell you anything at all, that the very moment you are most certain that you are not me is the exact moment that you are in the gravest danger of becoming me. Because that was my certainty too, you see. Right up to the very end, I never once thought of myself as the betrayer. I thought of myself as the helper, the realist, the practical one, the one who truly understood what needed to be done. The betrayer never knows that he is the betrayer. That is the very thing that makes him the betrayer. Self-knowledge was the one gift I never gave myself until it came upon me all at once, too late, in the empty garden. So do not stand at a safe and comfortable distance from my story. Come close to it instead. Let it come close to you. Let it frighten you the way that it ought to frighten you, the way that a warning is meant to frighten the one it is trying to save. Ask yourself the very questions that I never once asked myself in time while there was still time. What coin am I quietly taking in the dark, and what soft whisper am I believing about it? What sin am I carefully dressing up in the fine clothing of virtue so that I can go on doing the wrong thing while still feeling like a righteous person? Where am I secretly disappointed in him? Disappointed that he is not the God I wanted him to be. Not granting me the kingdom I demanded, not moving on my schedule, not answering on my terms. And what am I tempted to do? What am I already doing in that hidden disappointment? These are the questions that could have saved me and did not, because I never asked them until the asking could change nothing. I give them to you now, across the centuries, paid for in the only currency I have left to spend, which is the total ruin of my own soul. Let my ruin be your warning. Let my endless night be the very thing that drives you, running toward his light, And now I must fall silent, for I have said all that I am permitted to say, and all the rest belongs to him, to the Lord I betrayed, and the mercy I refused. But before I go back into my silence, let me say to you the one thing I have learned that is worth more than all the silver in all the world, the one piece of wisdom that I purchased with my own damnation, the one truth that I would carve, if I had the power, into every human heart that has ever beaten or ever will. It is not your sin that determines your destiny. It is what you do with your sin. Carry it to him, and there is no sin in all the world that can damn you. Carry it away from him, and there is no sin so small that it cannot become the rope and the tree. I had the worst sin. Peter had a lesser one. And yet Peter is a saint, beloved and celebrated across all the ages, and I am a curse and a byword, and the difference between us was never the size of what we did. The difference was only the direction in which we ran when we finally saw what we had done. He ran toward the mercy. I ran toward the dark. Everything depends upon the direction in which you run. So when your own night comes, and it will come, for it comes to all, run toward the light. Run toward the open door. Run toward the kneeling Lord with the towel around his waist, and the basin in his hands, and the bread of friendship held out across the table toward you. Run toward the feet that were pierced for you. He is waiting. He has always been waiting. He was waiting for me, even in the garden, even at the very moment of the kiss, even then. And he is waiting for you now, in this very moment, with the same patience and the same love. Do not make him wait in vain. Do not do what I did. That is my confession. That is the warning I have carried with me across 2,000 years of silence and darkness. Hear it and live. The voice falls silent now, and we return from that imagined darkness back into the light of where we ourselves actually stand, you and I together, on this side of the cross and the empty tomb, with the whole story finished and known and complete. We have listened to the imagined confession of the man who became a single word, and we have done it not in order to honor him, for there is no honor in what he did, and we will not pretend that there is, but in order to learn from him, because there is a terrible and a necessary and a deeply personal lesson written across the wreckage of his ruined soul. And it would be a kind of sin of our own to look away from it without letting it do its work in us. And the lesson, when we finally have the courage to look at it directly, is not far from any one of us. That is the first thing we must take from all of this, and perhaps the most important. The L0125 of Judas is not a lesson about a uniquely and monstrously evil man who lived and died long ago and whose sin has nothing whatsoever to do with us, who can be safely filed away in the category of villains we will never resemble. The lesson of Judas is a mirror held up before our own faces, and when we look into it honestly, without flinching, without looking away, we do not see a monster looking back at us. We see ourselves. We see the very same capacity, present and alive and waiting in every human heart, including yours, including mine, to take the small coin in the dark and to call it nothing, to dress up our worst and most shameful motives in our finest and most respectable virtues, to grow quietly disappointed in God when he refuses to be the God we ordered, when he will not move on our timetable or answer on our terms or build the kingdom we demanded, to stand near the light for years and years and never once let it pass the surface and down into the deep places where we actually live. And most of all, most dangerously of all, most quietly and most fatally of all, to look at our own sin when it is finally and fully exposed before us, and to believe the terrible lie that it is simply too great, too dark, too far gone to ever be forgiven. Because that, in the very end, is what destroyed Judas. We must be clear about this, completely and finally clear, because everything depends upon it. It was not the betrayal that damned him, monstrous and unspeakable as the betrayal was. It was the despair that came after. It was the refusal, the final and fatal refusal, to believe that the mercy of God could possibly be wider than the failure of one man. And that despair, that particular and deadly and quiet form of unbelief, is available to every single one of us in every season of failure, in every dark night of the soul, when we finally see ourselves as we truly and fully are. It does not announce itself as the great sin that it is. It comes disguised as humility even. It whispers that of course God could never forgive a wretch like you, that it would be presumptuous, almost arrogant, to imagine that the grace could reach so far down. But that false and deadly humility is in truth the highest and most destructive pride of all, for it sets the limits of our own sin above the limits of God's mercy, and it calls our worst day stronger than his blood. Think for a moment about how strange it is, how it cuts against everything we would naturally expect, that Judas and Peter both failed on the very same night, and that we remember the one as the chief of saints and the other as the prince of traitors, and that the difference between these two eternal destinies was not the magnitude of the sin, but the direction of the turning afterward. We would expect the gospel to sort men by the size of their sins, to draw a line somewhere and to say, the sins on this side may be forgiven, but the sins on that side cannot. But the gospel does no such thing. The gospel draws no such line. The gospel says instead that the thief on the cross, dying for his crimes, turning to Christ in his final agonized hour, with nothing to offer and no time left to prove anything, that thief entered paradise that very day. The gospel says that Saul of Tarsus, who hunted down the followers of Jesus and dragged them from their homes and consented to their deaths and breathed out murderous threats against the church, became Paul the Apostle, who wrote nearly half of your New Testament and called himself to the end of his days the chief of sinners, saved as an example of the perfect patience of Christ toward even the very worst. There is no sin on the wrong side of the line because there is no line. There is only the open door and the question of whether you will walk through it or turn away. This is almost too much for the human heart to accept, and that, perhaps, is part of why Judas could not accept it. We are built, somewhere deep down, to believe in a kind of moral accounting, a ledger of debts and payments, a scale on which our good must somehow be made to outweigh our bad. And when the bad grows too heavy, when it crashes down past all hope of being balanced by any good we could ever do, the scale tips all the way over and we conclude that we are lost, that the math simply cannot be made to work, that we are beyond saving. But the gospel is not a system of accounting. The gospel is the announcement that the debt, the whole impossible crushing debt, has already been paid in full by another, by the very one we wronged, and that all we are asked to do, all we can do, is to receive what has already been done. Judas tried to settle his own account. He threw the silver back. He tried, in his way, to undo it, to pay it back, to balance the unbalanceable scale. And when he found that he could not, that no amount of remorse or restitution could undo what he had done, he despaired, because he was still thinking in terms of the ledger, still trying to be his own savior, still refusing the only salvation there is, which is the one that comes entirely from outside ourselves, as a gift, unearned and unearnable. Consider, too, how patient the love of Christ was with Judas, all the way to the end. And let that patience speak to you about how he regards you in your own failures. He did not expose Judas to the other disciples, though he could have. He did not denounce him, shame him, cast him out before the others. He washed his feet. He gave him the bread of honor. He let him keep the purse to the very end, never once, as far as we are told, accusing him of the theft that he surely knew about. And in the garden, when the moment of betrayal came, when the kiss was pressed to his cheek, he called him friend. Not a lie, that word, not mere irony, but the last reach of a love that would not stop loving even the one who was killing it. If that is how he loved Judas, the one who sold him, then how do you imagine he regards you, with your far smaller failures, your hidden coins, your secret disappointments? Not with the cold eyes of the priests who said, "What is that to us?" but with the grieving, hoping, patient eyes that looked at the betrayer in the torchlight and still said, "Friend." There is a question that haunts this whole story, and perhaps it has been haunting you as you have listened, and we should not pretend it is not there. If Judas was foretold, if the scripture said the betrayer would come, if it was woven somehow into the very plan by which the world was saved, then was Judas not trapped? Was he not merely playing a part written for him before he was born, a part he could not refuse? It is an old question, and a heavy one, and we will not pretend to dissolve it completely, for there are depths in the providence of God that no human mind can fully sound. But hear this much, that God foreknew what Judas would freely choose does not mean that God forced the choice. The scripture foretold the betrayal, but the scripture never forced the betrayer's hand. Every step that Judas took, he took freely, of his own will, for his own reasons, and at every step the door stood open for him to turn back, and we have heard in his own imagined voice how many times and how tenderly that door was held open. The mystery of how God's sovereignty and man's freedom fit together is real, and it is deep, but it is not a trap door through which responsibility falls away. Judas was not a puppet. He was a man. He chose, and so do you. And there is something else here, something we dare not miss, about the very mercy that Judas refused. The 30 pieces of silver that he threw down upon the temple floor, the priests would not return to the treasury, because it was blood money, the price of blood, and so they used it to buy a field, a potter's field, a place to bury strangers in. And that field was called ever after the field of blood. Think of what was made from the very wages of the worst betrayal in history, a place of rest for the bodies of strangers, the outcast, the foreign, those who belong nowhere and to no one, given at last a place to be laid to rest. Even out of that blood money, even out of the proceeds of that treachery, God brought forth a kind of shelter for the lost. That is what God does. That is what God always does. He takes the very worst that men can do, the betrayal, the silver, the cross itself, and he brings out of it salvation, shelter, life. If God could redeem even the wages of Judas into a resting place for strangers, then there is nothing in your life, no failure, no waste, no ruin, that he cannot somehow take up and redeem if only you will bring it to him and not bury it alone in the dark. So let the imagined confession that we have heard together do its true work in you now. Let it drive you, not down into despair where Judas went, but toward the open door that Judas refused to walk through. Because the whole point of his story, the entire reason that it sits there in the gospel narrative like a warning lit in fire, a beacon on a dark and rocky shore, is to send us running in the exact opposite direction from the one in which he ran. He ran into the night. You do not have to. That is the whole of it. You do not have to. The same Lord who knelt down before him and washed his feet, who handed him the bread of friendship, who called him friend in the garden even as the kiss of betrayal was being given, that very same Lord kneels before you now, today, in this moment, with the very same love, the very same endless patience, the very same wide-open door. And the mercy that Judas could not bring himself to believe in is as real and as solid as the ground beneath your feet. And it is offered to you, fully and freely and without condition, no matter what you have done, no matter how far you have walked out into the dark, no matter how certain you are that you have finally gone too far. If you have heard, somewhere in the confession of Judas, the faint and unwelcome echo of something that lives in your own heart, a coin you have quietly taken, a sin you have carefully dressed up as a virtue, a disappointment with God that has slowly begun to curdle into something colder and darker, a quiet despair that whispers to you in the night that you have gone too far ever to come back. Then hear this final word with everything that is in you and let it sink down past the surface and into the deep place where you actually live. You have not gone too far. You cannot have gone too far because there is no too far. Because the door is still open, because the Lord is still kneeling, because the mercy is real and it is wider than your worst day and deeper than your deepest failure and stronger than the strongest despair that has ever taken hold of your soul in the blackest hour of the night. Where Judas ran into the night, you can turn even now and run into the light. That choice, the very choice that he got so tragically and so finally wrong, is still standing open in front of you, still yours, still waiting, still able to be gotten right. Do not wait as he waited until it is too late to choose. Do not carry your sin to the priests of this world, to the people and the things that can offer you no forgiveness and no rest. Carry it to him. Tonight, in the quiet, wherever you are, in whatever language your heart prays in, carry the whole weight of it to the only one who can lift it, and lay it down at the pierced feet that were nailed to the cross for exactly this. And find there the welcome that Judas could have had, the welcome that Peter found on the beach in the grey morning light, the welcome that has never once been refused to anyone in all of history who came, however broken, however late, however ashamed, and simply asked to be received. Let us sit a little longer with this, because there is more here, more than a single hearing can hold, and the story of Judas has things to say to the particular shape of your own ordinary life that we would be foolish to rush past in our hurry to reach the comfort of the ending. Think again about how it all began, not with the kiss, not with the silver, but with that first small coin slipped from the common purse in the dark. We rush always to the dramatic end of the story, to the betrayal and the garden and the rope, because the dramatic end is safely far away from our own quiet lives. None of us expects to stand in a garden and hand the Son of God over to armed soldiers. But all of us, every one of us, stands daily before the small purse in the dark. All of us hear the soft and reasonable whisper that says, "Take a little. No one will know. You have earned it. It is owed to you. It is only this once." The betrayal of Judas did not begin as a betrayal. It began as a series of small private compromises that no one ever saw, each one so minor that it seemed absurd to make anything of it, each one explained away before the conscience could even fully object. And this is precisely why his story is so dangerous to us and so necessary for us, because it shows us that the road to the garden is not a single great leap into darkness, but 10,000 small and reasonable steps, each one taken in dim light, each one justified, each one almost nothing. What is your purse in the dark? Where is the place in your life where you alone keep the count, where no other eye watches, where the small whisper has begun to speak to you? It need not be money at all. It may be the small lie you tell so smoothly now that you hardly notice it leaving your mouth. It may be the private resentment you feed in secret, nursing it, turning it over, letting it grow fat in the dark while you smile and speak kindly in the light. It may be the compromise you made once and have now made 100 times, the line you crossed once with a pounding heart and now cross without a second thought. It may be the disappointment with God that you have never spoken aloud to anyone, the quiet sense that he has let you down, that he has not given you what you asked for, what you were owed, what you deserved, and the slow cooling of your heart toward him that has followed. Whatever it is, hear the warning of Judas. Nothing happened when he took the first coin. The sky did not darken, and that silence taught him that the line was not guarded. But the silence was not safety. The silence was the most dangerous thing of all. The line was guarded after all, only the guard was patient, and the reckoning was not cancelled, only delayed. And think again about the disguise. about the way Judas could stand in that fragrant room and rebuke a woman's extravagant love in the name of the poor, while in truth caring nothing for the poor at all, thinking only of the purse. This is perhaps the most frightening thing in his whole story, more frightening even than the betrayal, because it is the most subtle and the most universal. We can do the wrong thing for the wrong reason while clothing it so completely in the right reason that we deceive even ourselves. We can be cruel and call it honesty. We can be cowardly and call it prudence. We can be selfish and call it stewardship. We can withhold love and call it boundaries. We can nurse our pride and call it principle. And the more religious we are, the more skilled we may become at this terrible art, for religion gives us a whole vocabulary of high and holy words with which to dress our low and unholy motives. The Pharisees did it, Judas did it, and we do it every day more than we know. The only protection against it is a ruthless and prayerful honesty, a willingness to ask of every righteous-sounding thing we say and do, what is really underneath this? What is the true motive crouching behind the noble word? It is a hard and humbling question, and we will not always like the answer, but it is the question that could have saved Judas, and it is the question that can guard your own soul from the slow rot that destroyed his. And think finally and most deeply about the disappointment, about the lion he wanted and the lamb he was given. For here, perhaps, is where the story of Judas comes closest of all to the secret heart of your own faith. We all come to God with a picture of who we need him to be and what we need him to do. We come with our demands, spoken or unspoken, our timetable, our terms, our idea of the kingdom we want him to build for us. And the living God, the real God, the God who is actually there, will not be confined to our picture. He will not be the lion when we demand a lion if his purpose is to be the lamb. He will go to Jerusalem to die when we wanted him to go to Jerusalem to reign. He will answer our prayer with a no, or with a not yet, or with a something else entirely when we were certain we knew exactly what we needed. And in that gap, in that painful space between the God we wanted and the God who is, something will be decided in us. We will either surrender our picture and trust the God who is wiser than our wanting, as Mary did when she broke the jar, as Peter eventually did, as all the saints have done. Or we will nurse our disappointment as Judas did, until it curdles into the conviction that we understand better than God does, that we must take matters into our own hands, that we must force the moment God refuses to force. The disappointment itself is not the sin. Every honest believer has felt it. The sin is what we do with it, whether we carry it to him in trust or harbor it against him in pride. Do you see now how close this man is to you? Do you see how the comfortable distance you began with has quietly closed? You began perhaps certain that you were nothing like Judas. And the whole point of sitting with his story is to discover that the seeds of everything he did are present in your own heart, the small theft, the self-justifying disguise, the disappointment with God. This discovery is not meant to crush you. It is meant to drive you, while there is still time, to the only safety there is, which is not your own goodness, for you have just seen how fragile and how easily corrupted that is, but the mercy of God, which is the one thing strong enough to hold a soul that has finally seen the truth about itself. For here is the great and final paradox of the whole story, the thing that turns it in the end from a tale of despair into a doorway of hope. The very thing that destroyed Judas, the seeing of his own sin, is the very thing that must happen to every soul that will be saved. Peter saw it too. Every saint has seen it. You cannot run to the mercy until you know that you need it, and you cannot know that you need it until you have seen, really seen, the truth of what you are. The difference is never in the seeing. The difference is only in where you run once you have seen. Judas saw and ran into the night. Peter saw and ran eventually to the feet of Christ. And the whole of the gospel hangs upon that turning, upon which way the broken soul will run when at last it sees itself by the cold light of the truth. So if this story has made you see something in yourself that you would rather not have seen, do not despair and do not look away, and above all, do not run into the night. That sight, painful as it is the beginning of grace, not the end of hope. It is the very thing that can drive you home. The tax collector in the temple, who would not so much as lift his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and cried, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner," went home justified, the Lord said, rather than the proud and confident Pharisee beside him. The seeing of his sin did not damn that man. It saved him because of where he took it. He took it to God and asked for mercy. That is the whole of it. That is the entire difference between heaven and hell in the human heart. Not whether you have sinned, for all have sinned. Not even how greatly you have sinned, for the mercy has no limit. But only this, when you saw it, where did you run? We do not know, in the end, the eternal fate of the man we have been speaking of, and we will not pretend to know what God has not told us. The Scripture speaks hard words about him, and we will not soften them into something they are not. But neither will we claim a certainty that belongs to God alone. What we know, what we can say, what the story is given to us to teach, is not finally about the destiny of Judas at all. It is about ours. It is about yours. The story holds up his ruin not so that we may sit in judgment over him, comfortable and superior, but so that we may be warned and turned and saved. He has become, against everything he ever wanted, a kind of dark gift to the church, a permanent and terrible reminder of how near the light a soul may stand and still be lost, and of how the only thing that finally saves is not nearness, not knowledge, not even sorrow, but the simple turning of the broken heart back toward the open arms of the one it has wronged. May you never need to learn what Judas learned too late. Or rather, since all of us must learn in our own way the truth of what we are, may you learn it as Peter learned it, with your face turned toward home. May you, when your own night comes, and it will come, hear beneath the accusing voices the one voice that still calls you friend. And may you run, not into the dark that swallowed Judas, but into the light that raised up Peter, the light that is still shining, the door that is still open, the Lord who is still, even now, kneeling with the basin and the towel, waiting to wash the feet of anyone who will only come to him. There is one more thing to hold before we come to the end, and it is perhaps the most beautiful thing of all, the thing that the whole long and sorrowful story has been quietly pointing toward from the very beginning. It is this, that the betrayal of Judas, the worst act of treachery in the history of the world, was the very thing through which the salvation of the world was accomplished. Sit with the strangeness of that, the handing over of Jesus to his death, that monstrous and unforgivable deed, was the doorway through which the forgiveness of all sins came into the world. The kiss in the garden led to the cross, and the cross is the place where the debt of every sinner who would ever live was paid in full. The very evil that Judas did was taken up by God and turned into the means of the world's redemption. This does not excuse Judas. Let us be clear once more for the last time. The fact that God brought good out of his evil does not make his evil good, any more than the fact that a doctor can set a broken bone makes the breaking of it a kindness. Judas meant betrayal, and betrayal it was. But God, in his unsearchable wisdom and his unstoppable love, took even that betrayal and wove it into the great tapestry of salvation, so that the very moment of deepest human treachery became the doorway to the deepest divine mercy. And this tells us something about God that we must not miss, something that bears directly on every dark and ruined place in your own life. There is no evil so great that God cannot bring good out of it. There is no betrayal so deep that God cannot redeem it. There is no failure so final that God cannot somehow, in ways we cannot foresee, weave it into a story that ends in glory. If that is true of the cross, the greatest evil and the greatest good ever joined together in a single event, then it is true of your life as well. The thing you most regret, the wound that will not heal, the failure that defines you in your own private accounting, the betrayal you committed or the betrayal you suffered, the years you feel you have wasted, the relationships you have broken, the person you have become that you never meant to become. None of it is beyond the reach of the God who took the betrayal of Judas and made it the salvation of the world. Bring it to him, lay it down before him. Watch what he does with the very things you were certain could only ever be loss. And this is why the despair of Judas is so unspeakably tragic, and why we keep returning to it, because his despair was a kind of blindness to the very thing that was happening even as he despaired. At the very moment when Judas was hanging himself in that field, certain beyond all doubt that he was beyond all hope, the one he had betrayed was on his way to a cross that would purchase the forgiveness of exactly the sin Judas had committed. The remedy for his despair was being prepared even as he gave himself up to it. The blood that could have washed him whiter than snow was about to be poured out, and he died believing there was no blood, no mercy, no hope for him. If only he had waited, if only he had believed, if only he had held on through the long dark of that Friday and that Saturday until the impossible morning of that Sunday, when the stone rolled away and death itself was defeated and the door of mercy was flung open so wide that not even the betrayer would have been turned away. That is the lesson, finally, that towers over all the others. Wait, believe, hold on through the dark. Do not let the night convince you that the morning will never come, for the whole testimony of the gospel, the whole witness of the empty tomb, is that the morning does come, that the darkness does not have the last word, that the despair which feels so final and so certain in the black hours before the dawn is in fact a liar, because the dawn is coming, the dawn has come. The dawn broke over an empty tomb 2,000 years ago and has been breaking ever since over every soul that will only wait for it and believe in it and turn toward it. Judas died on the wrong side of Easter, but you do not have to. You live on this side of the empty tomb. You know what Judas did not live to see. The mercy is proven now. The victory is won. The door is open. The Lord is risen. And there is nothing left between you and the fullness of his forgiveness except the simple turning of your heart toward home. So let us not end where Judas ended, in the dark, alone, in despair. Let us end where the gospel ends, in the light, in the company of the forgiven, in hope. Let the story of the betrayer become, in your hands and in your heart, not a tale of doom, but a doorway of grace, a warning that drives you not into the night, but into the light, a mirror that shows you your need, and then turns you gently and firmly toward the only one who can meet it. That is what it was given to us for. That is what it is doing in you even now, if you will let it. The confession of Judas, heard rightly, does not lead to death. It leads to life, for it sends you running to the very feet that he betrayed, the very feet that were pierced for you, the very feet that are waiting, even now, to receive you home. We should pause, too, over something easy to overlook, which is that Judas was never alone among men who failed, and that the whole company of the 12 was, in the end, a company of the broken. We tend to imagine the 11 as heroes and Judas as the lone villain, but that is not the picture the Gospels give us. When the soldiers came, all of them fled, every one of them. They forsook him and ran into the dark, leaving him alone among his enemies. Thomas would not believe until he had put his fingers in the wounds. James and John had jockeyed for the highest seats in the kingdom, asking to sit at his right and his left in glory, while he spoke of a cross. They argued among themselves more than once, about which of them was the greatest, even on the last night, even at the Last Supper, even as the shadow of the cross fell across the table. They were not a company of saints who happened to contain one sinner. They were a company of sinners, everyone. And what set Judas apart at the last was not that he sinned and they did not, but that when the sin had run its course and the truth stood plain, he alone refused the mercy that the others in time received. This matters for you because you may be tempted to think that the people God uses, the people God saves, the people God loves, are a different breed from you, a better sort, made of finer material. They are not. They were cowards and doubters and strivers, and men slow to understand and quick to quarrel. The church was built on such people, and it has been made of such people ever since. And if you are waiting until you are good enough, strong enough, pure enough to come to Christ, you will wait forever, and you will have missed the entire point, which is that he came precisely for the ones who are not good enough, who cannot make themselves good enough, who have nothing to bring but their need. The healthy have no need of a physician, he said, but the sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. If you are a sinner, and you are, then you are exactly the one he came for. The only thing that can keep you from him is the thing that kept Judas from him. The proud and despairing refusal to believe that the call includes even you. And consider how the story of that night must have weighed upon the others ever after, those who lived. Peter carried the memory of the rooster's crow to his grave, and surely it shaped every word he ever preached about grace, for he preached as a man who had been forgiven much. The others carried their own memory of how they had fled. They knew, all of them, in a way they could never have known otherwise, that they were saved not by their own faithfulness, for they had been faithless, but by his. They had nothing to boast of. They had failed him utterly, and he had sought them out and restored them anyway, found them hiding behind locked doors, and breathed his peace upon them, and sent them out as his witnesses, the very ones who had run away. This is the church. Not a gathering of the strong, but a gathering of the forgiven, of those who failed and were restored, who fled and were sought out, who denied and were called back by name. Judas could have been among them. The only thing that kept him out was that he would not let himself be found. There is a kind of pride that wears the mask of humility, and it is the most dangerous pride of all, and it is worth naming plainly because it is the very thing that may be whispering to you. It says, "My sin is too great, I am not worthy. Who am I to think that God would forgive a wretch like me?" It sounds humble, it sounds almost holy, but underneath, it is the deepest arrogance, for it makes your sin bigger than God's grace, your failure stronger than his cross, your darkness more powerful than his light. It sets you up in your own private theology as the one being whom the blood of Christ cannot reach, the single exception to a mercy that has saved murderers and thieves and persecutors and adulterers and traitors beyond counting. To call yourself the one sin God cannot forgive is not humility. It is the last refuge of a pride that would rather be damned on its own terms than saved on his. Judas, in the end, would not be saved on God's terms. He would not be the wretch who simply came and received. He chose the rope over the open hand, because the open hand required him to admit that he had nothing, that he could do nothing, that he must simply be forgiven. And that, for a proud man, can be the hardest thing of all. So let go of that pride, if it is in you. Let go of the secret arrogance that calls itself unworthiness. Stop trying to be worthy. You are not worthy, and you never will be, and that is precisely the point, for the gospel is not for the worthy, but for the needy, not for those who have earned it, but for those who simply, humbly, brokenly receive it. The thief on the cross earned nothing, proved nothing, had no time to make anything of his deathbed faith, and he was in paradise that day, come the way he came, come empty-handed. Come with nothing but your need and your sin and your willingness to be forgiven. That is all that has ever been required. That is all that is required of you now. And there is a quiet comfort hidden in this story for those who have been the betrayed rather than the betrayer. And we would not want to pass it by, for some of you listening have been wounded by a kiss of your own. Some of you have been handed over by someone you trusted, sold out by a friend, abandoned in your own garden by those who swore they would never leave. If that is you, then look at where Jesus stood in this story and take heart. He knows exactly what it is to be betrayed by an intimate friend, to share bread with someone who is already plotting your ruin, to feel the kiss on the cheek that marks you for death. The Lord you pray to is not a stranger to betrayal. He drank that cup to the dregs, and he met his betrayal not with bitterness, but with love, calling even Judas friend, praying even from the cross for those who drove the nails. He does not ask you to do what he himself has not done. And he offers to walk with you through your own betrayal, to heal what was broken in you, to give you the grace to forgive as he forgave, in time, in his strength, not your own. Your wound is known to him. Your betrayal is not wasted. He can redeem even this. And let us say a word finally to those who feel they are not Judas and not the betrayed, but simply tired, simply worn down, simply far from God in a way they cannot quite explain. The slow drift that is no single dramatic sin, but 1,000 small distances accumulated over years. Perhaps you have not betrayed anyone. Perhaps you have just grown cold, grown distant, grown busy. Let the prayers fall silent and the scriptures gather dust and the old warmth fade until you can barely remember what it felt like to feel near to God at all. This story is for you too. For the drift away from God is made of the same small steps as the road of Judas. Each one almost nothing, none of them a decision, all of them adding up to a soul that has wandered far from home without ever choosing to leave. And the remedy is the same. Turn, simply turn. The distance you have drifted does not have to be walked back step by weary step. The father in the story saw the prodigal while he was still a long way off, and ran to him and fell on his neck and kissed him. You do not have to crawl home. You only have to turn toward home, and you will find that he is already running toward you, that he has been watching the road for you the whole time, that the distance you so dreaded is crossed in an instant by a love that will not wait for you to make your own way back. If you have come this far with us, through all of this, through the darkness and the warning and the long road of one ruined soul, then we want you to know how deeply grateful we are that you stayed. We know it was not an easy journey. We know this story asked something real of you, asked you to look honestly at the darkness that lives so near to every human heart, including your own, including ours. But we believe, with everything in us, that it is precisely in facing these hard and searching stories, the uncomfortable ones, the ones that hold up a mirror we would rather not look into, that the gospel does its deepest and most lasting and most transforming work in a human soul. So before you go, before you return to whatever ordinary moment is waiting for you on the other side of this video, we ask you warmly and sincerely to do just a few small things. If this video has stirred something in you, if it has met you in a place where you needed to be met, if it has reminded you that no failure is ever truly final and no soul is ever beyond the reach of grace as long as it will only turn and receive it, then please subscribe to this channel if you have not already and turn on the notification bell so that every new video we make comes straight to you and you never miss a single one of these journeys into the heart of the scripture. Give this video a like because it genuinely, truly helps these words to reach more of the hearts out there that need them. Hearts you will never see and never know, scattered across the whole wide world. And please, please, share this video with someone you love. You may already, even now, be thinking of their face, the friend walking through a dark and lonely night, the loved one who has come to believe in some secret place that they have gone too far ever to come back. The soul who needs to hear, perhaps more than they need anything else in all the world right now, that the door is still open, that the mercy is still real, that it is not too late. Send it to them. Let the warning of Judas and the mercy that he refused become, for them, the very thing that turns them back from the night and toward the light. The videos that we have coming to this channel are among the most meaningful and carefully prepared work that we have ever set our hands to. Further journeys deep into the scripture, into the lives and the voices and the hard-won and costly truths of those who walked closest to the very heart of God. We pour everything we have into them, and we cannot wait to share them with you. So stay close to us. Stay subscribed. The road ahead is rich beyond telling, and we promise you the very best is still to come. And so, at the last, we leave you with a blessing, the same blessing we would speak over you with our own hands upon your head if you were here with us in the room. May the God of all mercy, whose grace is wider than your worst failure and deeper than your darkest night and stronger than the strongest despair that has ever gripped your heart, keep you and hold you and run to meet you every single time you turn, even a little, even at the very last, toward him. May you never once believe the ancient lie that you have gone too far. May you always, in every season of failure and in every dark night of the soul, find the strength and the faith to run toward the light and not into the night. May you carry your sins, all of them, not to the priests and the powers of this world who can give you no rest, but straight to the pierced feet of the one who bore them all, and find there the welcome that never has been and never will be, refused to anyone who comes. And may the love of the Lord Jesus Christ, who knelt and washed even the feet of the one who betrayed him, who called his betrayer friend, who died to purchase forgiveness for exactly the sins you are most afraid can never be forgiven, be with you and remain upon you and go before you and behind you and within you, wherever in this wide world you are watching from, this day and all your days, now and always, even forevermore. Amen. God bless you from the bottom of our hearts. And we will see you very soon in the next video.